a lot of great things about video games that when you play it, and sometimes you don't really know exactly why you like certain things. I think that sometimes music is that case, and you see that in film and in television as well. You have people who will really say, "Wow, I love this song, I love this music, I love the way it was put together." However, you have other people that don't really pay attention to it until later. In gaming, you have a group of people who love remixes and tracks from video games, and you have other people who kind of let it pass by. But make no mistake that music is very important to telling a story, to conveying emotion, and I don't think that there's really anyone else, at least that I've heard of recently, that's been able to convey this as much as our guest today. He is a sound music engineer out of Los Angeles and had tons of credits to him, not only in video games but in films. I mean, like even like cartoon films like Justice League Flashpoint. I mean, that was like one of my favorite uh, uh, films in comic books that I saw recently, and of course, video games like Star Wars Battlefront and films as well. I mean, Breaking Bad as far as TV series. So we're really, really happy today to be joined by John Rod. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Um, I guess the best thing is to just start from the beginning. Um, I guess everybody has like that start that they say I want to do something. Though some people I guess maybe they can end up loving and wanting to do something as a career later in life. For you, was there did the idea of wanting to work in music? Did it come at an early age, and if so, how did it start?
Yeah, I was very lucky that in my family's home there was a decent turntable and a I convinced my father to buy a decent set of headphones, and I had three older sisters, and they were into all different kinds of music. But the Beatles, there were Beatles records around, and I remember listening with headphones. And as a very, very young kid, I remember just somehow figuring out what a music engineer was. I don't know how I figured that out. It was obviously before the age of the internet, but I was very interested in sound and music. I did all sorts of typical music engineer stuff. When you're younger, I ended up playing with synthesizers, studying the trumpet, playing in bands, but also theater lighting design, photography, and even playing with the tape machines. I don't actually remember how I got these ancient little tape machines to play with, but I think they were at uncle's or something. So, but it was really a mix of photography and things that had time that were temporal in terms of music and theater and technology. And I'm very, very lucky. I've been able to put it all together and make a career out of it. And I really love what I do and enjoy what I do very, very much.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I guess, have uh, people that they look up to, and as far as like, let's say, if you're a writer, you may have books and things that you grow up reading and things like that. Did you have that as far as music, as musical scores, that you said, hey, when I heard this, it's like, okay, these are the people that I'm looking for to emulating, or inspiration, or someone you look up to?
Yeah, there's a funny story there. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. But when I was 11 years old, 1977, I'm dating myself. Um, Episode 4, the first Star Wars film came out, and I literally snuck out of my parents' house. I said I was going to clean my room, and I was all set up, and I snuck out of the house, which I'd never done before. I was a good kid, and I went to the movie theater and saw Star Wars because I knew what it was about, but my parents were afraid that it might be too violent for, too not too violent, too grown up. They were afraid it would be too grown up for an 11-year-old. Fair enough, it was before the age of the internet, and things were different then. So the film blew my mind. The special effects, I thought maybe I wanted to work in special effects or the models, but the music was incredible, and I loved the music as well. And the John Williams score was just unbelievable. I'd never heard anything like it. That I guess the world reacted the same way. So that was really a tipping point for me. And there have been lots of little influences over the years, but I will never forget watching that film. And I've now worked on 4 Star Wars video games, all in all. We can talk about that later on when we get there. And it's just such a thrill to be a tiny part of the Star Wars universe, to have my hands on the music. It's just unbelievably cool.
Now, I mean, I had to see. like the difference? Because I read some of the other interviews that you've done, and like what sound mixing is about, being an engineer, recording music, recording engineer. And there was some stuff that's like, I was like, wow, these guys are really into music. It's kind of like when you go to the audio video club and you see these people are like, oh, you think you have a sound system? We actually modified our walls to make sure we get the right reverb and stuff like that. I think that sometimes, people may not understand the difference between being an engineer and then someone who is a composer or something like that. Could you just tell us a little bit about exactly, your career path, your job?
Absolutely. So in most films, almost all films and most television shows, especially dramatic ones and so forth, original music is written. So there are very talented people, much more talented than me, that write the music for that project. If it's for a film, it's to the picture generally, and if it's for a video game, that's a whole other discussion we can get into. But original music is written for these things, such as John Williams for the first Star Wars film, and the subsequent five, I guess it was after that, or sorry, six. Sorry, slow on the math. And right, because episode seven's out now, of course. Um, so these people write the original music, and then orchestrators take that music and to a greater or lesser degree flesh it out for the orchestra and say, oh well, let's double this woodwind melody in the cello or whatever, and they flesh it out further and make sure it gets onto the printed music correctly. And of course, music doesn't have to be just orchestral, it could be electronica, which means there might be synthesizers or guitars or anything. And so those people need someone like me to go and record the music, be it a singer or an oboe or a guitar or a 100-piece orchestra, and then also mix the music to adjust all the little levels. And basically, my analogy is to take the raw materials, take the clay, so to speak, and polish it into a final sculpture. And there are lots of different ways to take a lump of clay and make it into a sculpture. And that's what mixing is the final adjusting, panning, level, reverb, just the final adjustments. And make the music sound great on its own and also in the project. So that's what I do. I'm a music engineer. I record music, I mix music, and then also for record things and film scores and so forth, I do some mastering, which is more of a sort of a record industry kind of thing. But it's I do it for video games as well.
So you also went to university to get schooling in this, and I know anyone who works in entertainment or whatever field that they're trying to go into, they usually talk about the first big thing that they did first out of university. Can you tell us about what that was for you?
Yeah. Right when I came out of university, I was actually working as a rock video assistant editor and picture editor assistant kind of thing. Wasn't really my passion by then. I'd figured out that I really wanted to be a music engineer, but I wanted to be at work at a great studio. I wanted to really cut my teeth at not a little tiny facility, but a big facility with all different types of music and film scores would be great and that kind of stuff. So I worked at a studio called Manta, which is sadly no longer in existence, but that was from 1989 for about 5 years. I worked at Manta and assisted and apprenticed under a number of great music engineers and learned a ton of stuff, what to do and also sometimes more importantly, what not to do. Um, so that's really where I learned the majority of what I know. I mean, I've been learning as I go, of course, and refining my skills. But those 4 or 5 years at that one studio where I worked with different engineers and in different studios really was where the meat and potatoes of my skill set was really crafted.
So, I mean, I was just looking over the different things that you've done. I mean, working on films, working on TV, things like that. What was, I guess, maybe the biggest person that you worked with that you'd be like, wow, like maybe you went home or you told your friends or something that you're like, hey, I worked with this person.
Um, I've been incredibly fortunate that I've worked with tons and tons of really interesting artists, singers, bands, film score projects, albums over the years. Um, and it would be really hard to single out just one. I will say that when I moved to Los Angeles, 1997, and I was working, gosh, that's like 19 years ago. Um, when I first moved to LA, I was working as an assistant engineer at an amazing studio called Ocean Way in Hollywood, which used to be Great Western, which is where the Beach Boys worked, and I mean, incredible, incredible set of studios in Hollywood. And that was my first job in LA. And I will say that one of my very, very early sessions was with Eric Clapton,
Nice.
and it was a whole band playing together like the way they used to make records to a certain degree. And so it was Greg Philingans on keyboards and Steve Gadd on drums, and just Marcus Miller playing bass and producing, and arguably the best band in the world, or like just an insane, insane collection of musicians. Things would happen like the producer would say to Eric Clapton, "Hey, what do you think about putting some female background vocal, like a single background vocal on this one song? What do you think, Eric?" And her to go, "Yeah, I think that'd be good. Hang on, let me call Cheryl." And he just picks up the phone, dials a number, and it's Cheryl Crow. And she was a superstar at that time already. And she just came to the studio 2 days later, and she was completely cool, and she sang amazingly well, of course. She used to sing background for Michael Jackson at the beginning of her career, I understand. And like experiences like that, and I'm sitting there going, this is just
Yeah,
this is
Cheryl, of course.
yeah, just knew the number by heart, just dialed, called, and it was just and she was super cool, and Mr. Clapton was super cool, and it just everyone was just amazing, and everyone playing at the top of their game, and somehow I joined into the party. It was just unbelievable, and it, when I was on staff at 20th Century Fox on the film scoring stage for 7 years, subsequently as their orchestral scoring recordist, and worked on tons and tons of films there. And the first Matrix film was also an unbelievable experience because we had never seen anything like it. The directors were super cool and happy to chat about their film and the groundbreaking film that The Matrix was. And I was just so honored to be a part of that team. It was just incredible. So there have been lots of pretty amazing oh wow moments in my life. But I will say, very importantly, I think it's in my nature, I think it's in my DNA, but I learned very early on, right from the beginning, day one, I think it's just who I am. I treat everyone exactly the same. Doesn't matter if you're doing a demo tape and you have no money and you've no name, or if you're Sheryl Crow and Eric Clapton. I treat you exactly the same way as a regular person, but with lots of respect and lots of politeness. That's just who I am. And that's really served me very well in my career and in my life. I think that's part of the key to my success. It may be accidental, but it's worked really well.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that it's important that when you're working with somebody, you try and keep that level. I mean, not only does it keep you from like geeking out, but it also can help you build relationships. I mean, maybe next thing Eric Clapton is like, "Hey, I got John." I call him, just like that, because it was such a nice experience. Because a lot of times, it's like when I talk to people, people say, "Hey, it's how someone treated me." Sure, it's great to have the gushing fan, but if someone just talks to me as a regular person, I remember that and I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's. I was actually trying to think earlier. I can't think of okay, maybe one example in 30 years of someone who clearly wanted to be treated like a diva superstar. You know what I mean? But one person who shall remain nameless in 30 years. Okay, maybe two. That's remarkable. I mean, I've met you too, and all these amazing legendary film composers, and people just want to be taken care of and liked, and they just want to have a good time. I think people are pretty much the same inside.
Well, I mean, I have to ask now. I know you can't say anything. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I mean, can you tell us a little bit about maybe what it was, what kind of diva stuff did this person want?
Um, well, yeah. They wanted to record their lead vocal lying on the floor, which was incredibly hard. I don't know if you know microphone stands, but to try to microphone someone, like a mic's designed to be like here, and they wanted to lie on the floor in the pitch black and have the mic, and that was tough. And there was lots of. Oh, there was one other person who
Did
was
they
a
have a
little.
hangover? That sounds like so. Like, look, I'm really laid out, but I think I can belt this out. Turn down the lights and just put the mic next to my half-dead body.
Yeah, it was someone who was an actor who was a part of a musical, and it's a long story, and I can't get into the details. Now that I'm thinking about it, okay, there have been a couple of eccentric people I've worked with, but you know, you just have to smile and no problem, and sure, I can make that happen.
I remember when I actually started watching like documentaries and seeing like behind the scenes stuff, and I love that kind of stuff. Before we go on, was there anything like you saw someone had like a ritual? Because man, I didn't realize how much goes into like some of these performances. Yes, this person maybe have done tons of records, concerts, but still, when you get to an event or a film or something, a lot goes into it. Did you ever see like a ritual or something that somebody did that you were like, wow?
Um, I think, you know, nothing comes to mind. I think people kind of tend to do that stuff in private, perhaps, like
Yeah.
in the restroom or something. Um, so yeah, nothing comes to mind, but I've definitely been lucky enough to see some great performances and you know amazing musicians that can just sort of turn that on and off. I worked with a number of members of the Rolling Stones on a blues album years ago, actually back when I was at Ocean Way, and and I guess it was pretty much uh, Charlie Watts wasn't playing drums, but it was the rest of them were there, and it was pretty awesome. They came in and they were kind of a bit kind of a you know mellow, shall I say, and then we hit record and they just turned it on and it was electric. And I'd never seen a band before do that in that kind of way. It was just when it was showtime, boom, they were there 100%, and that was also amazing. They just electrifying. So that was pretty cool.
One of the things that I saw in some of the interviews was how you talked about making the right emotion, and this can be in a game, and film, and television. And I really thought about it, and it's like based on what you talked about, mixing and putting in the right music and working with people who have composed these songs. Um, what is it exactly that it takes to really know how to get that feel? Because sometimes people overlook that and they don't even realize when they say, man, when I was playing this game or watching this film, the music, it just popped, I mean, perfectly with it. So can you tell us a little bit about that process, about hitting that emotion in film, television, and games?
Sure. I'm very very lucky in that a lot of the heavy lifting, not to sound totally humble or anything, but a lot of the heavy lifting has been done in terms of orchestration and composition. So the table is kind of laid for me. But to make an analogy or to make an example, for example, if I'm recording a singer, if I put the microphone right by their face and if they sing quietly into it or breathy, it'll be a very intimate, very close sound. But now I could take that same recording and I could put a whole lot of artificial reverb on it, which makes it sound like you're in a parking garage kind of thing, like a long tail after the sound. So I could take that same intimate, warm, present vocal and I could bathe it in delays and reverb and processing and make it sound like they're actually very far away. And so I could make them sound intimate and with you, or I could make them sound sort of far away and potentially lonely, or depending on the song. And that's just one example of one performer. I'm on the EA Star Wars Battlefront game, for example. There were about 100-piece orchestra, a very very large orchestra. So I have microphones for both the room, and I also have microphones on all the instruments as well, the spot sections, the violin sections, the woodwinds, the percussion, what have you. So again, I have all these choices in terms of making things sound close or far away. I can make them sound bright, like on a home stereo, you have tone controls. I don't know if anyone ever has home stereos anymore. Do people still have home stereos?
The people
I,
that
I,
really care about that setup, yes. Expensive ones I've seen.
okay, on your car radio, there you go. On the car radio, you have like a treble control and a bass control. Um, and so I have those controls too. I can make things bright, or I can make them dark, or I can sculpt the sound and shape the sound in lots of different ways. So what I'm getting at is to create the mood and the emotion. I have to really pay attention, of course, to what's the project, what does the composer want, what does the scene call for, what does the project call for, what's on the screen, or what is the game like, or what's happening in the game at that moment. is it action music? Is it, whatever, that kind of stuff. So there are lots of things to help guide my path, but I have to, of course, pick and make my own path, make a bridge, I suppose. And it's tremendous fun. And I enjoy the collaboration with the composers who hire me because they're always options. And they might say, John, that's a little too sad or a little too spacey or a little too aggressive sounding, or it's not aggressive sounding enough, and let's make it more punchy and more aggressive. So I've got all these different tools, and then what I want to do plus the feedback from the composer is how I record the music or mix the music or master the music.
As far as just the differences between film, television, and video games, especially with games nowadays. I mean, there's so much money into it, so much production. Like you said, with the music, if you have voice acting, with what they do with motion capture, things like that, it's almost like on par what you see with some TVs and films. Now, as you being an engineer and you study this, done this for a long time, do you see like a big difference between like a video game and movie and film, or is it really close nowadays with those big budget games like Star Wars?
Yeah, the wonderful thing about games is that for quite a few years now, for a long time, they've really wanted to have an incredibly high production value, and they've really looked to Hollywood to to have sort of a path and have some clues to how things should sound. If you want things to sound big and epic, I mean, you look at certain film things, and I'm not just. I should be clear. I'm not trying to say that games are just copying films, but the film has a rich history of drama and excitement and music and production of music that really helps inform the emotions and helps tell the story. So, and certain things in the game music industry are fresh and exciting, and lots of stuff are unique to the game world. Um, to really dive into to what you're asking about, of course, when I'm working on a film project or on a television project, the music is locked to that scene. So, in other words, you would watch a film or a TV show over and over again. The music is always going to happen in exactly the same place because it's glued in there, right? It's beginning to end, of course. So, what that means is when I'm working on a scene, I have the dialogue. I have a reference track with the dialogue and the temporary track, reference track, audio track of the sound effects. Um, for example, I did the music. I recorded the score and mixed the score for Elysium, which is a science fiction film. Matt Damon came out about 2 years ago for Sony Pictures. Um, and so when I'm working on Elysium, I can see, is Matt Damon sick from the radiation? Is he throwing up? Is this like an awful moment in the film, or is he shooting at things, or are things blowing up? The rockets and spaceships and stuff. So, is there dialogue at any given at any given point in the music? Is there dialogue? So, um, I know, for example, I shouldn't push up the woodwinds too loud in the center speaker because there's dialogue there, or I shouldn't push up that synth effect because there's dialogue there. So I can sculpt the music cinematically for film and for television, but I have a roadmap in front of me with which helps informs my decisions. In games, it's different in that there are certainly moods created. The composer will create moods, and certain pieces of music will shift. There's something called a game engine in the game, and depending how the player plays, the music will shift between different pieces of music to up the excitement, to bring it down a bit, kind of a thing. So the composer has built the score in building blocks in various ways, and sometimes layers. Some projects have layers. Um, but a lot of that stuff is magically handled these days by the game engine in terms of switching energies and switching emotions. So I'm not specifically concerned with dialogue because depending how you play the game, the music will unfold differently every time. So it tends to be more of a mood and an energy, and what do we want the music to accomplish, and how do we want it to sound generally in this part of the game, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that it's just when you're hitting those things like in a game, like when you got to the point where you can sit down and you see some of these games that, you know, come out like a movie. Like I think about Heavy Rain and things like that. But even before that, even back with Ninja Gaiden, you had that first cinema effect, and you had the music and the build up even before you started the game, and you had cutscenes. So it's like I always thought that wow, it was heading towards that film. And even when they started having like live action, they had like actors come in and do it. And now you've gotten to the point where sometimes you even have a game competing with box office releases. That happened with Call of Duty. So it's like video games has really reached up there and right up there with television and film.
And absolutely, and it's just incredible because of the advances in the game engine. I mean, I've worked on multiple scores where there have been different layers to the score, and how you play the score will seamlessly, if you're down at the stealth level, and then if you go poke around a corner and something happens or you do something, then it can go from stealth to excite to battle, and it can ramp up. But the game engine is so great now that people are using the various game engines that people are using is that it can know, it doesn't just jar. In the old days, it used to like, whoa, the music just changed, kind of a thing. And now it can wait to a specific point in the music, a bar and beat, and seamlessly switch to a musically appropriate place in a different piece of music or add a layer. And so the music can not be repetitive at all. And it's just amazing how games and the amazing people that build these things and the teams have really advanced the art. It's really tremendous, and it's just such a great experience. I mean, it's really impressive.
Now, as far as Star Wars, I mean, we recently just had Episode 7 come out, and people were going crazy about that. I mean, you had people who were watching the original. You had some people that just grew up when you had the original 3 come out, and then you have people who were all the way back from the originals. And now you have like even a new generation. As far as Battlefront, like when I play it, it's like what's great about it is when you're in there and you're shooting around and you're hearing the music and hearing everything, it's like wow, this is the kind of games I want to play. I remember back with Dark Forces on the PC, that was like kind of the first person shooter type Star Wars game, and it was just great. With all the stuff that you grew up sneaking out at 11 to go see it and things like that. I mean, what was it actually like working on like Star Wars games and being such a big part of it?
It's just tremendous fun, and I've had the pleasure now of working on 4 different Star Wars games. Star Wars Connect was I guess the first one, and Star Wars 1313, which unfortunately didn't get finished. It's been put on a definite hold. But I worked on Star Wars 1313 with composer Jesse Harlan. Star Wars Connect was with Gordy Habb and Kyle Newmaster, and then Star Wars Battlefront, which I think the hardest thing working on Star Wars Battlefront was not talking about it. They're very strict non-disclosure agreements, and if I had $1 for every non-disclosure agreement I've signed, I'd be a rich man. In the gaming world and also the film world as well, I get it. People come up with ideas, and they don't want copycat films or copycat games, and what's the expression? Loose lips sink ships. They just don't want people talking about their projects, and that's fine. That's totally cool. But to have landed Star Wars Battlefront with my longtime client and friend Gordy Habb, composer Gordy Habb, we've worked on lots of projects over the years, and he's a great person to work with, and writes awesome music. Very much in this case, I mean, his films work on all different kinds of music. I mean, sorry, he writes music for all different kinds of styles, but he also does Star Wars extremely well. And he can write in the style of John Williams, which was necessary for Star Wars Battlefront because a minority of the score in Star Wars Battlefront was the original old John Williams scores. But the majority of the score, and there was a lot of it, is new music written by Gordy Habb in the style of John Williams, and it had to be able to go John Williams, Gordy Habb, Gordy Habb, John Williams, John Williams, Gordy Habb, Gordy Habb, Gordy Habb. And, as you're playing the game, you're not supposed to notice. And very pleased with how it all turned out. One of the hardest things about working on EA Star Wars Battlefront was not talking about it, because Gordy landed the project a couple of years before the game actually came out. And he would write a bunch of music, and then it would get recorded, mixed, mastered, delivered, and then he'd go back to writing. And it was done that way in 3 big chunks over the course of about 2 years. I couldn't talk about it because of the non-disclosure agreement. So I was tremendously excited to be a part of the Star Wars universe again, in a very small way, but I couldn't tell anyone. So I was thrilled to finally be able to talk about it and enjoy the excitement of the new film coming out, and I'm a big fan, so it's really been a lot of fun.
So my last question. Now we know that, of course, you have a love for music, you have a love for film, Star Wars, of course. What about games? Like, are there games that you grew up playing, and do you still play now? I mean, I know with the work that you do, you're probably extremely busy, but is there games that you grew up with, and do you still play any games today?
Yeah, you're a wise man, J.A. I have a very busy schedule. I'm very, very fortunate to have tons of stuff going on with work, recording and mixing and mastering. So I really don't have a lot of time for games at all. Um, you know, family life and so forth. Um, when I was very, very young, I would play things like Asteroid and things. Those are like a million years ago, and that was fun. The very dawn of video games, I suppose. I mean, Pong. Um, but one thing that I've enjoyed doing was that I worked on Star Wars Connect, and that's a very family friendly game. And with the sensor, you can just jump around the living room and so forth. And playing Star Wars Connect with my daughter is just hilarious. And we don't do it enough. We've got lots of stuff to do, of course, family life. But Star Wars Connect is a lot of fun to play with. I think when she's a little bit older, then we can play EA Star Wars Battlefront.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I just want to thank you, John, for talking to us today and sharing your insights, not only in music, but also all the things that you've done. I mean, I think that anyone who works in anything, whether they want to be an actor, game developer, or writer, or anything, would love to have the kind of career that you had. And just the fact that it's all encompassing, you love it, it's really great to be able to talk to someone that has that insight and that experience. Thanks you very much for coming on with us.
My pleasure. It's been just great to be here. Real pleasure and great to talk.